Driven to her knees, a brilliant artist watched her world crumble under crushing debt and cruel threats. A cold, silent stranger walked into her ruined studio, seeming to seal her fate. But when enemies attacked, that enigmatic man wasn't just a threat. He was the city's ruthless mafia boss, claiming her as his forever. Now, bound by a dangerous bargain, can she survive his opulent, possessive world? The scent of linseed oil and ancient parchment was Alara Vance's oxygen, the very breath of her existence. It clung to the worn tweed of her jacket, permeated the strands of her auburn hair, and was a constant, comforting presence in the hallowed, dust-moted air of Evam Restorations. The studio, nestled precariously on a quiet cobblestone street in a forgotten corner of Greenwich Village, was more than just a place of work. It was a sanctuary, a stubborn relic of a bygone era in a city that ceaselessly devoured its past. Sunlight, weak and winter-thin, filtered through the tall, grimy windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in a golden haze above her workbench. Alara traced a delicate fracture on the canvas before her, a small, forgotten landscape from the Dutch Golden Age, its vibrant blues and ochres muted by centuries of grime and neglect. Her tools, fine as a surgeon's, lay arrayed beside her, miniature scalpels, cotton swabs, and tiny brushes, each a silent extension of her will. Her fingers, slender and surprisingly strong, moved with an almost reverent precision, gently peeling back a layer of oxidized varnish. With each painstaking stroke, a sliver of the painting's original glory revealed itself, a triumph of light bursting through encroaching shadow. This was her gift, her burden, her singular purpose, to coax beauty back from the brink of oblivion. She could see the stories whispered in the brushstrokes, hear the echoes of forgotten artists in the textures. It was a language only she truly understood. Yet, despite the spiritual richness of her work, her stomach rumbled in hollow protest, a mundane reminder of her increasingly precarious reality. A cold draft snaked its way across the polished wooden floorboards, raising goosebumps on her arms, even though she wore 2 sweaters beneath her smock. The ancient boiler had given up its ghost weeks ago, and she simply couldn't afford the repair. Heat, like so many other necessities, had become a luxury she could no longer justify. She ran a hand over her perpetually damp hair, pushed back a stray curl, and sighed, the sound thin and reedy in the quiet vastness of the studio. Another day, another miracle needed, she thought, a bitter, familiar taste on her tongue. Her apartment above the studio, a cramped, single-room affair, echoed the same chilling truth. The stack of unopened bills on her dilapidated kitchen table grew taller by the week, a monument to her rapidly eroding financial stability. Rent for both the studio and her living space was astronomical in the city, a relentless vampire draining her dry. And then there were the medical bills for her father. Her father, Reginald Vance, had been a brilliant but eccentric art historian, a man whose mind lived perpetually among the masters while his feet stumbled over the harsh realities of life. He'd never quite recovered from the sudden death of Alara's mother a decade ago, retreating further into the comforting silence of dusty archives. Now, a silent, insidious illness was stealing his memory, piece by agonizing piece, anchoring him to a sterile hospital bed miles away in upstate New York. The specialized care he required was exorbitant, an abyss into which Alara poured every spare cent, every ounce of hope she possessed. She had sold off the few meager heirlooms her mother had left, even considered parting with some of the lesser restored pieces from Evam's own collection, a desperate thought that made her stomach churn with a visceral disgust. The memory of Isolde Thorne's last phone call, sharp and venomous, pierced through the quiet reverence of the studio. Ms. Vance, Isolde's voice as smooth and cold as polished marble, had purred through the receiver just yesterday. Your grace period is long expired. My legal team will be taking proactive steps. Evam, with its delightful history of non-payment, makes for rather appealing new property. Isolde was a real estate titan, a ruthless businesswoman who collected distressed properties like others collected stamps, gutting them of their soul and replacing it with sterile, soulless concrete and glass. But Alara knew Isolde wanted more than just the building. She coveted Alara's techniques, her reputation, her invaluable client list, all to fold into her burgeoning, morally ambiguous art conglomerate. Isolde's ambition was a predator, and Alara, with her ancient brushes and fading masterpieces, was its current prey. A shiver, not from the cold, but from a primal fear, ran down Alara's spine. To lose Evam was to lose herself. This studio was her anchor, her identity. It was the last fragile link to her father's legacy, a legacy she was failing to uphold. The shame of it burned a slow, agonizing fire in her chest. She was a restorer, yes, but who would restore her? Who would piece back the fragments of her own shattered dreams? She stared at the Dutch landscape, its nascent brilliance now half revealed, half obscured. It was a mirror. She was a masterpiece, fading, almost lost beneath layers of hardship, yearning to be brought back to life. But there was no patron, no savior, no wealthy benefactor waiting to see her true worth. There was only the gnawing hunger in her belly, the cold dread in her heart, and the relentless ticking of the clock. Alara picked up a tiny swab, dipped it in a delicate solvent, and returned to her meticulous work. The repetitive motion, the intense focus, was a balm, a temporary escape. She could lose herself in the microscopic world of pigment and canvas, ignoring the roaring tide outside her walls. But even as she painstakingly brought a tiny patch of azure sky back to its original glory, the distant, ominous rumble of an approaching black car echoed faintly through the cobblestone street. It was an unfamiliar sound, too heavy, too deliberate for this quiet corner of the city. A prickle of unease, sharp and insistent, crawled up her neck. She paused, her hand hovering over the canvas, her breath catching in her throat. The rumble grew louder, closer, vibrating through the very foundations of Evum, a dark, intrusive thrum against the fragile peace of her sanctuary. It sounded like an ending. Or perhaps a beginning she wasn't prepared for. The ominous rumble Alara had heard earlier solidified into the guttural purr of an engine, a low, powerful growl that vibrated through the very ancient bones of Evum restorations. It was too deep, too rich to be an ordinary taxi, too refined to be a delivery truck. A sleek, obsidian black car, a predatory beast of polished chrome and tinted glass, glided to a silent halt just beyond the studio's worn oak door. Its presence was an affront to the quaint, time-worn charm of the street, a stark, metallic scar against the warm brick facades. Alara paused, her fine-tipped brush hovering over the delicate brushstrokes of the 17th century landscape. The cold air inside the studio suddenly felt sharper, laden with an invisible tension. She hated interruptions, especially when her mind was so deeply immersed in the quiet communion with art. A moment later, the driver's side door opened with a soft, almost imperceptible thunk, and a man unfolded himself from the luxurious interior. He wasn't a suit-and-tie city worker, nor a casual visitor. He was something else entirely. Tall, impossibly broad-shouldered beneath a flawlessly tailored charcoal overcoat, he moved with an effortless, predatory grace that spoke of contained power. His dark hair, thick and slightly long, swept back from a sharp, angular face. His features were chiseled, a sculptor's dream and a sinner's confession. High cheekbones, a strong, unyielding jawline, and lips that were thin, almost cruel, when at rest. But it was his eyes that truly snagged her breath, dark, intelligent pools that seemed to absorb the meager light, revealing nothing, yet suggesting an abyss of untold stories. He looked less like a human and more like a carefully crafted weapon, sheathed in expensive fabric. Another one of his soul's goons, Alara thought, a flash of weary indignation igniting within her. Her shoulders stiffened. She was tired of the veiled threats, the subtle intimidations. She wouldn't allow some hired muscle to further desecrate her sanctuary. He couldn't be a client. Her clientele was discerning, polite, often eccentric, but never got this. This man radiated danger, a primal, untamed force that felt utterly out of place in her world of gentle solvents and fragile beauty. He stepped inside, not knocking, not asking permission. The heavy door swung shut behind him with a soft click that echoed like a final judgment. The scent of him hit her then, not cologne, but something deeper, richer, a subtle blend of expensive leather, cold steel, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of wood smoke, primal and masculine. It was an intoxicating, alarming aroma that made every nerve ending in her body prickle with awareness. "Can I help you?" Alara asked, her voice clipped, sharper than she intended. She didn't look up immediately, instead focusing intensely on the painting, feigning a composure she didn't feel. Her heart had begun a frantic, agitated rhythm against her ribs. He didn't respond at once. She could feel his gaze on her, a physical weight, meticulously dissecting her, the studio, the fragile world she desperately clung to. The air grew colder, charged with his silent scrutiny. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, resonant rumble, a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards beneath her worn boots. Alara Vance. It wasn't a question, but a statement, an acknowledgement of his quarry. She finally met his eyes. They were even darker up close, unfathomable, yet strangely captivating. "That's me. And you are." Dante Volkov. His name, uttered with such quiet authority, hung in the air, a whisper of power. I am here on behalf of Ms. Isolde Thorne. Ilara's jaw tightened. Of course. More threats? More empty rhetoric about proactive steps. She put down her brush, her hands trembling slightly, betraying her outward calm. Tell Ms. Thorne that Evum Restorations is not for sale, not for lease, and certainly not for gutting. I will not allow her to turn centuries of history into another one of her soulless glass towers. Her voice, though strained, held an unwavering conviction, a desperate fire. Dante Volkov didn't flinch. His expression remained utterly impassive, a mask carved from granite. Ms. Thorne's instructions are clear. I am here to conduct a final assessment of the property's contents before a transition of ownership. His tone was devoid of emotion, a pronouncement of fate. Transition of ownership? Ilara scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You mean theft? Extortion? This isn't just property, Mr. Volkov. These are priceless artifacts. Centuries of human genius. My life's work. She gestured wildly around the studio, her hand sweeping past a delicate Ming Dynasty porcelain vase resting precariously on a nearby table, a piece she was preparing for its intricate gold leaf repair. In her desperate, impassioned fervor, her sleeve snagged the edge of the table. The vase wobbled, teetering precariously, its smooth ancient surface reflecting the pale light for a terrifying second before it began its slow, inevitable descent towards the unforgiving wooden floor. A gasp tore from Ilara's throat, the sound of pure horror. Her mind screamed. No, not that. It was a piece she had spent months meticulously documenting, preparing. It represented everything she was fighting for. Time seemed to warp, slowing to an agonizing crawl. But Dante Volkov was faster. Impossibly fast. In a blur of movement that defied his imposing size, he closed the distance between them, a mere 2 steps, his large, powerful hand shooting out. His fingers, long and strong, wrapped around the delicate curve of the vase just inches before it shattered. The porcelain felt cool and surprisingly substantial in his grip. He stabilized it with an effortless ease, then gently, almost reverently, placed it back on the table. The air around them crackled with the residual energy of a near disaster, the sharp scent of dust disturbed in ozone. Ilara stood frozen, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a strange, unwilling admiration. Her gaze locked with his. His dark eyes, now closer, held an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply captivating. There was no anger, no accusation in them, only a cold, calculating curiosity, and something else, a flicker of recognition, a dangerous spark that seemed to acknowledge the raw, unyielding spirit simmering beneath her fragile exterior. He didn't look at her like a problem, or an object, or even a victim. He looked at her like a puzzle, an intriguing anomaly. He held her gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable, a silent assessment passing between them. Then, with a subtle shift of his weight, he released her from his piercing stare. His hand, still carrying the ghost of the porcelain's coolness, moved to the inner pocket of his coat. He extracted a single business card, thicker and heavier than any she had ever seen, the paper a deep, matte black, devoid of logos or fancy script. Only a single, embossed silver V and a phone number, stark and unforgiving, adorned its surface. He placed it deliberately on the corner of her workbench, next to her discarded brush, not meeting her eyes again. Consider your options, Ms. Vance. His voice rumbled, lower this time, almost a private whisper meant only for her. It was a veiled warning, an unsolicited invitation, an unspoken promise of both danger and salvation. Then, as silently and abruptly as he had arrived, he turned. The large oak door opened and closed again, the subtle click echoing in the sudden, cavernous silence. The rich scent of leather and cold steel lingered, a ghost in the hallowed air. Ilara remained rooted to the spot, her hands still instinctively hovering over the Ming vase. Her eyes fell to the black card. It felt impossibly heavy, a leaden weight on the workbench, radiating an almost tangible heat despite its cool, smooth surface. She could feel the faint tremor in her fingertips. Dante Volkov had come, seen, and gone, leaving behind not just an intimidating presence, but an unsettling, dark promise. What kind of options did a man like that offer? And what would it cost her to take them? The eviction notice would arrive tomorrow. She knew it. And she also knew with a terrifying certainty that she was running out of time and out of options that didn't involve a devil's bargain. The official eviction notice arrived not with a whimper, but with a sharp, brutal thud as it slid through the mail slot of Evam Restorations. Alara found it lying like a pale, rectangular corpse on the cold, worn floorboards. Her fingers, already numb from the lingering chill of the studio, trembled as she picked it up. The paper itself felt thin and brittle, yet its words were inscribed with an undeniable, suffocating weight. Legal jargon, cold and devoid of human empathy, danced across the page, declaring her property forfeit, her time exhausted, her dreams officially, irrevocably extinguished. Isolde Thorne's name was printed at the bottom, a triumphant, venomous signature. 3 days. That was all she had left before the bailiffs would come, before strangers would dismantle her life's work, before Evam, the last bastion of beauty and purpose in her crumbling world, will be swallowed whole. A visceral wave of nausea rolled through her, threatening to buckle her knees. She sank onto a dusty old stool, the world around her blurring. The smell of linseed oil, usually a comforting embrace, now felt cloying, a suffocating reminder of what she was about to lose. Desperation, raw and stinging, propelled her into a frantic flurry of action. She wouldn't surrender. Not yet. She spent the next 24 hours in a relentless, exhausting battle against an invisible enemy. She called Mr. Henderson, a kindly, eccentric art collector whose priceless miniatures she had restored for years, hoping for a personal loan. His voice, usually warm and booming, was oddly subdued, hesitant. Alara, my dear, I simply can't. My hands are tied. Certain pressures have been applied, you understand. Business, you know. He wouldn't elaborate, but the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Isolde Thorne's tendrils reached far and wide, her grip insidious. She reached out to the Greenwich Village Historical Society, arguing passionately for Evam's preservation as a landmark, for the invaluable pieces it housed. Their secretary, a prim woman named Agnes, listened patiently, then delivered a rehearsed response. While we appreciate the sentiment, Ms. Vance, certain irregularities have come to light regarding your studio's financial stability and, regrettably, some concerns about your past professional conduct. The thinly veiled accusation of her being discredited years ago for blowing the whistle on a financial fraud, now twisted by Isolde's machinations, was a poison dart aimed directly at her career and reputation. Each door slammed shut. Each phone call ended in polite, sterile rejection. Each effort met with the impenetrable wall of Isolde's influence. Alara could feel her life constricting, suffocating, every avenue of escape systematically blocked. She barely ate, barely slept. Her eyes burned, her body ached, and a cold, heavy stone settled in her chest, replacing the desperate fire that had fueled her. The studio, once a haven, now felt like a tomb, waiting for its final interment. Late that night, hunched over her desk amidst the wreckage of failed attempts, her gaze fell upon the single, stark black business card. It lay there, an anathema in her world of delicate beauty, a chilling reminder of the man who had effortlessly saved her Ming vase from certain destruction. Dante Volkov. His name, cold and sharp, echoed in her mind. He was a predator, a shadow, a whisper of danger she had instinctively recoiled from. But now, with the abyss yawning before her, he was the only name left, the only terrifying, dangerous possibility. Her hand trembled as she reached for the card, her fingers brushing against its impossibly smooth, cool surface. It felt like holding a fragment of night itself. This is madness, her logical mind screamed. This is a deal with the devil. But what choice did she have? To surrender Evam, to watch her father languish without the care he needed? To let Isolde win? To become another casualty in her ruthless ascent? The image of the Ming vase, almost shattered, then saved by Dante's impossibly swift hand, flashed through her mind. He had the power. He had saved it. Could he save her? With a shuddering breath that hitched in her throat, she picked up her ancient flip phone, its screen cracked, its battery perpetually low. She carefully, painstakingly, keyed the number. Each digit felt like a betrayal of her own fierce independence, a step deeper into an unknown, dangerous current. The phone rang once, twice. Then a click. Volkov. His voice, deep and resonant, was a shock, like a splash of ice water in her already chilled veins. It held no inflection, no question, only an acknowledgement. He had been waiting. He knew. It's Alara Vance, she managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. The eviction notice came. The words felt heavy, shameful, admitting her defeat. A long, pregnant pause stretched between them, thick with his unspoken assessment. Alara could almost feel his dark gaze on her, piercing through the phone lines, stripping bare her desperation. As expected, he finally rumbled, his tone flat. Ms. Thorne is predictable in her greed. And you, Ms. Vance, are predictable in your stubbornness. A flare of indignation, even in her despair, sparked within her. I'm fighting for what's mine. And losing, he corrected, his voice devoid of sympathy. Tell me, Ms. Vance, are you still too proud to accept a lifeline? Even a dangerous one? The question hung in the air, a challenge, a taunt. Her pride, a stubborn beast, bucked and screamed, but the crushing weight of her reality, the image of her father's fading eyes, the echoing emptiness of Evum, swiftly silenced it. What do you propose? She choked out, the words tasting like ash. A simple exchange, Dante began, his voice taking on a chillingly calm, businesslike cadence. I clear your debts. All of them. The studio, the rent, your father's medical expenses, any outstanding student loans. Every single burden that currently crushes you will vanish. A gasp escaped her lips. It was an offer so impossibly grand, so utterly liberating, it felt like a mirage. What's the catch? She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. You will relocate. Immediately. To my primary residence. You will work exclusively for me, restoring my private collection. Your Evum restorations will remain legally yours, financially secure, and fully operational, but under my direct oversight and protection. And you, Ms. Vance, will be under my direct oversight and protection. His voice was a silken trap, its terms unfolding with ruthless precision. No more living in that drafty apartment. No more fear of a souled thorn. You will be safe, provided for, absolutely secure. The words, under my direct oversight and protection, resonated with a chilling possessiveness. This wasn't a job offer. It was a declaration of ownership. He wasn't just offering to buy her out. He was offering to buy her. Her independence, her autonomy, her very freedom. The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through her, a visceral revulsion against the idea of being controlled, confined. I can't, she stammered, her mind racing, searching for any other option, any other way out. I'm not a kept woman. I'm not a prisoner. You are a woman on her knees, Ms. Vance. Dante countered, his voice suddenly sharp, devoid of any pretense of politeness. A woman losing everything she holds dear because she believes pride is a more valuable currency than survival. You will not be a prisoner. You will be protected, cherished, even in your own unique way. But you will be mine to protect. My rules, my roof, my resources. You will cut all ties with your current destructive path, and you will adapt to a new reality. The alternative is quite simple. You lose everything. And a souled thorn will ensure your name is synonymous with professional ruin, long after Evum is a pile of rubble. His words painted a stark, unyielding picture. On one side, utter devastation, professional annihilation, and the slow, agonizing decline of her father. On the other, a golden cage, a dangerous protector, and the survival of everything she loved at the cost of her cherished independence. It was no choice at all. It was an undeniable, inescapable trap. She closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a burning path down her cheek. The surrender tasted bitter, metallic, like blood. But the image of her father's fragile smile, the memory of her mother's locket, her only remaining solace, spurred her on. I accept, she whispered, the words barely audible, a fragile admission of defeat and desperate hope. On one condition. My father. He must receive the best care, no matter the cost. Consider it done. Dante's voice responded instantly, a note of cold satisfaction in his tone. That was never a point of negotiation. My people will arrange his transfer tomorrow to a facility far superior to his current one. Now, Ms. Vance, pack only what you absolutely need. A car will be dispatched for you in 1 hour. Do not be late. The line clicked dead. Alara stared at the phone, then at the black card, then around her studio, her beloved Evum. 1 hour. The finality of it was staggering. She had just sold her soul, traded her freedom for a future shrouded in shadow and danger, all to save the fragments of her past. She was no longer Alara Vance, independent art restorer. She was something else now. Something is. A tremor ran through her, not just of fear, but of a strange, unsettling anticipation. What would living in a lion's den truly entail? The black car that arrived an hour later was a silent, imposing beast, its tinted windows reflecting the dying light of the gas lamps on the cobblestone street. It felt less like transportation and more like an armored carriage sent to collect a prize. Alara clutched her worn canvas bag, containing her most precious tools and her mother's locket, the only personal effect she dared to bring. Her few meager clothes, packed into a small duffel, felt utterly inadequate for whatever new reality awaited her. As she took one last, lingering look at Evam Restorations, a cold, heavy sense of finality settled over her. The studio, her sanctuary, now looked desolate, waiting for Dante Volkov's promised protection to cloak it in its dark, new embrace. The drive was unnervingly silent, through streets that grew increasingly manicured, then gated, then almost impossibly secluded. They pulled up before a mansion that dwarfed anything Alara had ever imagined. Not merely a house, but a fortress of dark stone and polished iron gates, partially obscured by ancient, gnarled trees. Security cameras, subtle yet omnipresent, glittered like cold, watchful eyes in the fading light. The air here felt different, hushed, heavy with unspoken power and immense wealth. Imposing figure, the size of a small mountain in a dark suit, opened the car door for her. His face was impassive, his eyes betraying nothing. He simply nodded, a silent command for her to follow. Alara stepped out, her worn boots sinking slightly into the meticulously raked gravel path. The scent of damp earth, expensive evergreens, and something else, a faint metallic tang, filled the air. This wasn't just luxury, it was impenetrable, absolute control. A golden cage, indeed. The interior of the mansion was a breathtaking, overwhelming symphony of dark wood, gleaming marble, an art that would make any curator weep. Ornate tapestries adorned walls of deep, rich hues. Sculptures, ancient and modern, stood sentinel in shadowed alcoves. Every surface gleamed, every corner breathed an air of meticulous, disciplined opulence. Yet, despite the undeniable beauty, an unsettling coldness permeated the grandeur. It felt less like a home and more like a museum, or perhaps a well-guarded vault. A slender, silver-haired woman in a crisp uniform, her expression as unreadable as the bodyguards, introduced herself as Mrs. Anya, the head housekeeper. "Welcome, Ms. Vance." Her voice was polite, almost robotic. "Mr. Volkov is awaiting you in his study. I will show you to your quarters first." Alara's quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment. A bedroom with a king-size bed draped in silk, a private sitting area, and a bathroom that boasted a marble tub the size of a small car. The air was warm, rich with the scent of lilies and expensive polish. Her duffel bag, placed carefully on a plush velvet settee, looked pitifully small and out of place. She ran her hand over the cool, smooth silk of the duvet. This was a different world entirely. A world where every comfort was provided, every need anticipated, but at what unseen cost? "I've traded one prison for another," she thought, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Only this one is gilded." The fear of Isolde Thorn had been a tangible, external threat. The fear of Dante Volkov was far more insidious, internal, a whisper in her soul that spoke of lost autonomy. Anya led her to a surprisingly bright, spacious room on the ground floor, far from the main living areas but with its own discreet entrance. "This is your studio, Ms. Vance," Anya announced, her voice still toneless. "Mr. Volkov insisted it be equipped to your exact specifications. Your materials have already been moved here from Evam Restorations." Alara stepped inside, and a small gasp escaped her lips. It was perfect. Better than perfect. The light was superb, a wall of north-facing windows bathing the space in a soft, even glow. The workbench was custom-made, sturdy oak, with every conceivable drawer and compartment. Shelves, heavy-duty and meticulously organized, lined the walls, holding her transferred solvents, pigments, and the very few treasured books from her personal collection. Even her microscope, an ancient but reliable model, was set up precisely as she preferred. New, gleaming tools lay in velvet-lined trays, miniature scalpels of surgical steel, brushes with bristles finer than spider silk, solvents in pristine, labeled bottles. A subtle, familiar scent of art supplies, not the stale, ancient scent of her old studio, but fresh, clean, expensive ones, filled the air. For a fleeting moment, a wave of genuine, unadulterated gratitude washed over her. He had understood. He had listened. This wasn't just a place to work. It was a sanctuary, carefully crafted. But the fleeting warmth was quickly replaced by a prickle of unease. How had he known her exact specifications? His reach was terrifyingly comprehensive. He didn't just buy her loyalty, he orchestrated her entire environment. The first few days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Alara immersed herself in her work, tackling a magnificent, tarnished Renaissance portrait from Dante's collection. His collection was astonishing, spanning centuries and styles, each piece a masterpiece in its own right, hinting at a deep, sophisticated knowledge of art. She worked with a quiet fury, her talent blossoming under the ideal conditions. Dante was a phantom presence. He rarely spoke to her directly, but she felt him. He would often materialize in the studio doorway, a silent, imposing shadow, watching her for long, unnerving stretches of time. He said nothing, his dark eyes observing every delicate brushstroke, every careful decision she made. He would leave as silently as he arrived, leaving behind a subtle echo of his presence, the faint, compelling scent of his cologne, a memory of cold steel and ancient trees. Alara bristled under his constant, silent surveillance. Her independence, a fiercely guarded treasure, felt constantly under siege. One afternoon, as she meticulously mixed a historically accurate pigment, he appeared, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his formidable chest. "Is there something you need, Mr. Volkov?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended, her back rigid. "Only to observe," he rumbled, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. "You are surprisingly precise, and possess a remarkable patience." His words, a rare compliment, still felt like an intrusion. "It's called skill, Mr. Volkov, and passion. Something one acquires over years, not buys overnight." Her tone was laced with defiance, a subtle jab at his wealth, his lips, thin and unyielding, curved into the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk. "Indeed, passion is a valuable commodity, and skill even more so. You would do well to remember that I acquired both in my own way." His gaze held hers, a silent challenge that brooked no argument. His power wasn't just about money. It was about will, cold and absolute. Despite her resentment, there were moments, small and disquieting, when his care manifested in ways that chipped away at her carefully constructed defenses. One morning, a box of rare, custom-ground pigments, sourced from Florence, appeared on her workbench, colors she had only dreamed of working with. Another time, Anya quietly informed her, "Your father's new medical team reports he's responding well to the new therapy, Ms. Vance." Mr. Volkov personally approved the experimental treatment. The news about her father hit her with the force of a physical blow. A wave of profound, aching relief, so intense it almost brought her to her knees, washed over her. He hadn't just paid for better care, he had orchestrated the best care quietly, without demanding gratitude. He knew her deepest fear, her greatest sorrow, and he had alleviated it with a ruthlessness as profound as his wealth. He approved what? Alara whispered to Anya, her voice thick with emotion. Anya simply inclined her head. "Mr. Volkov is thorough in his commitments." Thorough. The word echoed in her mind. He was a man who saw a problem and solved it, with surgical precision and absolute authority. And she was now a part of his commitments. The thought was both terrifying and, in a deeply unsettling way, comforting. He was a dark force, but he was her dark force. One evening, as she worked late, lost in the intricate details of a Baroque frame, a subtle shadow fell across her work. Dante stood there, closer than usual, his large frame almost filling the doorway. The mansion was silent, save for the faint tick of a distant grandfather clock. He watched her, not with scrutiny, but with an intensity that felt different. Softer, perhaps, or simply more focused. "You understand them," he murmured, his gaze on the portrait, then on her hands. "The artists, their intent." "I try to," she responded, her voice unexpectedly soft. "It's a conversation across centuries." "A privilege." He nodded slowly, a rare, almost imperceptible gesture. "A privilege I now afford you." His dark eyes met hers, and in their depths, Alara saw not just control, but a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, a strange, possessive fascination, a dawning respect that felt dangerously close to admiration. The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken words, with the heavy weight of their imbalanced power dynamic and the fragile, burgeoning understanding that was forming between them. She was a bird in a gilded cage, yes, but her keeper was a captivating, dangerous man who saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one else ever had. And in that terrifying recognition, a spark of something she hadn't anticipated, something warm and volatile, began to ignite deep within her. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible chime echoed through the silent mansion, a signal of an arrival. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His dark eyes, which had held a moment of such raw intensity, hardened. The warmth immediately extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating glint. He looked away from her, towards the sound, his posture shifting, becoming rigid, prepared. "It seems we have a company," he stated, his voice a low growl, devoid of any warmth. Alara felt a sudden, chilling premonition. The gilded cage, she realized, might be about to face its first challenger. The faint chime that had cut through the quiet intimacy of the studio was not a welcome bell. Alara felt it in the sudden visceral tension that coiled through Dante's formidable frame, the instant darkening of his eyes. The rare, almost soft moment between them shattered, replaced by an icy, impenetrable mask. He pivoted, his movement fluid and swift, and left the studio without another word, leaving Alara alone with a chilling premonition. The air seemed to hold its breath, thick with an unspoken threat. Her intuition, honed by years of navigating the precarious financial world of art restoration, screamed, "Isolde." It had to be. Isolde Thorne was not a woman who accepted defeat, especially not when her avarice had been so publicly thwarted by an unknown force. She would be seething, a viper ready to strike, and Alara, despite Dante's formidable protection, knew she was still the most vulnerable target. The next few days were fraught with an unseen tension. Alara buried herself deeper into her work, trying to find solace in the meticulous restoration of a series of faded miniatures from Dante's collection. Each tiny brushstroke was an anchor, keeping her grounded as her mind raced, churning with possibilities of Isolde's retaliation. Would she send goons? Spread malicious rumors? Try to physically harm her? The opulent walls of Dante's mansion, once feeling like a secure if confining shell, now felt thin, transparent, constantly watched. The first ripple came in the form of a cryptic email, forwarded to her by Anya, the housekeeper, who seemed to manage all official correspondence. It was from the prestigious Artistic Integrity Society, an organization Alara respected deeply and an important stepping stone for her career. The subject line read, "Inquiry regarding professional conduct." The body of the email was vague, hinting at unsubstantiated claims of gross negligence and ethical breaches during her time at Evum Restorations. There was no direct accusation, no specific charge, but the implication was clear. Isolde was quietly, insidiously working to dismantle Alara's reputation, to poison the well of her professional future. Alara's hands trembled, the tiny brush slipping between her fingers. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt a familiar, sickening wave of injustice. This was exactly what Isolde had threatened, what she had done before, manipulating the system, twisting truths, using her influence to discredit anyone who stood in her way. Even within Dante's gilded cage, the serpent could still hiss, its venom capable of reaching her. A fierce, desperate anger surged through her. She wanted to fight, to draft a scathing rebuttal, to defend her integrity against these baseless slurs. But she was isolated here, cut off from her contacts, her usual channels of communication. She was Dante's property, not her own advocate. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. That evening, during dinner, a solitary, exquisitely prepared affair in the cavernous dining room, Dante finally addressed the simmering tension. He sat at the head of the impossibly long table, a dark, regal figure, his presence filling the vast space. Alara, at the opposite end, felt dwarfed, consumed by the grandeur and his silent intensity. "You received an email today," he stated, his voice a low, unyielding rumble, cutting through the clinking of silverware. It wasn't a question. Alara flinched, startled by his omniscience. How did you know?" His dark eyes, usually unreadable, held a glint of something cold and dangerous. "There is little that transpires within these walls, or that concerns those under my protection, that I am not aware of, Alara." The use of her first name, possessive and deliberate, sent a shiver down her spine. Isolde Thorne is a desperate woman. Desperate women become foolish. "She's trying to ruin my reputation," Alara said, her voice tight with frustration. "She's twisting old accusations, trying to blacklist me from the entire art world. I need to respond. I need to defend myself." Dante merely raised a hand, a gesture of absolute authority that brooked no argument. "You will do nothing of the sort. Your silence, under my roof, speaks volumes. Any public defense from you would only lend credence to her baseless claims." It would imply you are an independent entity capable of defending herself, which, I assure you, you are not at this moment. His words, though brutal, contained an undeniable, chilling logic. He was reminding her of her place, of her total dependence. So I'm just supposed to let her get away with it? Alara clenched her fists under the table, a fiery rebellion stirring within her. On the contrary, Dante rumbled, a dangerous smile, thin and chilling, touched his lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of predatory anticipation. The soul thorn will discover that some battles are best left unfought, and some possessions are best left untouched. His eyes, dark and fathomless, met hers. You are with me now. They will not touch you. Not while I breathe. The absolute possessiveness in his declaration was breathtaking, terrifying, and in a deeply unsettling way, profoundly reassuring. He wasn't just offering protection, he was claiming her, marking her as his territory. The next day, a series of strange, unsettling events began to unfold in Isolde Thorn's carefully constructed world. Alara heard snippets from the mansion staff, hushed whispers carried on the wind. Her deal to acquire the historic Orion Gallery mysteriously collapsed overnight. Financing vanished. Critical shipment of her recreations for her new exhibit was impounded at customs, flagged for questionable provenance. Her most trusted legal counsel suddenly resigned, citing personal health issues, and disappeared. These were not public scandals, not direct attacks, but surgical strikes, precise and devastating, aimed at the very foundations of Isolde's illicit empire. Dante was not engaging in a public brawl. He was dismantling her, piece by intricate piece, from the shadows. He was a master of silent warfare, his network a sprawling, invisible web of influence and retribution. Alara sat in her studio, the custom-ground pigments shimmering in the sunlight, the Renaissance portrait almost complete. She thought of the email, the accusations against her professional integrity. She had done nothing, said nothing, yet the tide was already turning. The Artistic Integrity Society sent a follow-up, almost apologetic, retracting their inquiry, citing a misunderstanding of facts. A profound sense of awe tinged with a deep, unsettling fear settled over her. Dante had not merely offered protection. He had wielded his power with an unyielding, ruthless efficiency that defied conventional understanding. He hadn't just fended off the serpent. He had subtly crushed its fangs, ensured it would never strike at her again. He had done it without a single word of public confrontation, without leaving a trace of his direct involvement, a true maestro of the dark arts. She looked at her perfectly equipped studio, the invaluable art she was entrusted with, the knowledge that her father was receiving the best care imaginable. All of it, a direct result of Dante Volkov's dark bargain, his absolute, unwavering possessiveness. He was dangerous, terrifyingly so. But he was her danger, her terror, a formidable shield against a world that had sought to destroy her. She was a pawn, yes, but a pawn protected by a king who played by his own brutal rules. And in that terrifying, exhilarating realization, a new layer of something complex, something that defied simple classification as fear or gratitude, began to bloom in her heart. The gilded cage, she understood, was far more secure than she had ever imagined. And the man who owned it, he was far more powerful and far more protective than she could ever have conceived. And as Isolde's world continued to crumble in whispers and shadows, Alara knew, with chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning of her understanding of Dante Volkov's true power and her place within his dark dominion. The chilling efficiency with which Dante Volkov had dismantled Isolde Thorn's machinations left Alara with a profound sense of awe tinged with a delicious, dangerous fear. She had seen the raw, unyielding power of the man who now held her fate in his immaculately tailored hands. The Artistic Integrity Society had not only retracted their vague inquiry, but had also published a quiet, formal statement praising Alara Vance's unwavering commitment to ethical conservation practices. It was a complete reversal, orchestrated from the shadows, a testament to Dante's terrifying reach. Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was irrevocably bound to this man and his dark world. Yet, as the immediate threat receded, a new, more insidious tension began to bloom within the opulent walls of the mansion. Her studio, meticulously equipped, became her refuge. She immersed herself in Dante's vast and eclectic art collection, a treasure trove that spanned centuries and cultures. Working on these pieces became more than just a job. It was a silent conversation, a way to understand the man who owned them. Dante's collection was a fascinating contradiction. Alongside grand, classical landscapes and serene portraits, There were disturbing pieces, melancholic Goya prints, battle scenes rendered with brutal realism, brooding still lives, and unsettling modern sculptures that spoke of loss and betrayal. Alara, with a restorer's eye, saw beyond the surface. She noticed a recurring theme, subtle but persistent, images of broken trust, of figures reaching out into voids, of solitary strength amidst devastation. She felt a profound curiosity stirring within her, a desire to piece together the fragments of the man behind the art, much like she pieced together damaged canvases. One late evening, the mansion was shrouded in heavy, palpable silence. A storm had rolled in from the Atlantic, lashing rain against the tall windows, each gust of wind a mournful sigh. Alara, unable to sleep, found herself drawn to the mansion's grand library, a cavernous space filled with antique books whose leather-bound spines whispered of forgotten knowledge. She had often found solace there, perusing volumes on art history, feeling less isolated amidst the literary giants. As she approached the library, a faint, melancholic melody drifted from within, a haunting cello piece, rich with sorrow and quiet yearning. It wasn't music she'd heard before in the mansion, usually filled with a classical repertoire. Hesitantly, she pushed open the heavy oak door, careful not to make a sound. Dante Volkov sat in a deep leather armchair by a roaring fireplace, the only light in the vast room emanating from the dancing flames and the faint glow of an ancient gramophone spinning on a nearby table. He held a crystal tumbler, amber liquid swirling within. His head was tilted back, his eyes closed, his usually rigid posture softened, almost slouched. The firelight flickered across his chiseled face, revealing lines of weariness, a vulnerability Alara had never seen before. He looked broken, utterly, achingly alone. Her breath hitched. This was not the formidable, impenetrable Mafia Boss. This was a man stripped bare, consumed by a sorrow so profound it seemed to emanate from him like a palpable shadow. She froze, unsure whether to retreat or stay. Her heart, a treacherous organ, ached with a sudden, surprising empathy. As the cello reached its sorrowful crescendo, Dante opened his eyes. They were dark, swimming with an unfamiliar emotion, almost glistening in the firelight. He saw her then, standing in the doorway, a startled, fragile figure bathed in the flickering glow. A flash of his usual guardedness, perhaps even anger, crossed his features, swiftly followed by something else, resignation, perhaps even a flicker of tired acceptance. He made no move to hide his vulnerability. "Can't sleep, Alara?" His voice was a low growl, rougher than usual, tinged with the cello's melancholy. "Neither can you, it seems," she replied, her voice soft, tentative. She stepped further into the room, drawn by an invisible force, unable to turn away. "That's a beautiful and heartbreaking piece." He took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "It was my sister's favorite. She played the cello." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet the raw pain beneath was undeniable, a jagged edge in the carefully constructed facade. "Was?" Alara prompted gently, her voice barely a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, the crackle of the fire and the distant drumming of rain filling the void. "She died years ago. Betrayed. Not by an enemy, but by someone she trusted. Someone who saw her as a means to an end. A pawn." His grip tightened on the tumbler, his knuckles white. "She was soft, too trusting. Unlike me." A bitter, self-deprecating humor laced his tone. Alara felt a sudden, profound understanding. This was the source of his ruthlessness, his relentless control, his absolute intolerance for betrayal. He was protecting himself, and now he was protecting her from a pain he knew intimately. "I'm sorry, Dante," she said, her voice genuine, her heart aching for the lost sister, for the hardened man before her. He finally turned his gaze to her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Apologies are meaningless. Actions are everything." He paused, his gaze dropping to her canvas bag, which she still carried everywhere. "What are you carrying there so carefully, Alara Vance?" "More fragments of a broken past." A hesitant smile touched her lips. "Something like that. My mother's locket, and my most trusted tools. My past and my purpose." She found herself moving towards the armchair opposite him, drawn by the unexpected intimacy of the moment. She sat down, her worn tweed jacket feeling strangely comforting in the opulent room. "My mother, she died suddenly when I was younger. My father," he retreated into his books, his grief. "He was always kind, but distant. The studio, the art, It became my escape. And my burden. She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a captor, but as another soul marked by loss. I understand what it's like to feel utterly alone, to have the world crush you for simply trying to do what's right. Dante listened, his impassive mask softening imperceptibly around the edges. He nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. Isolde Thorn, she is a predator of a specific kind. She exploits the vulnerable, those with talent but without power. She did it to your father, twisting his research for her illicit schemes. She did it to my family years ago, though not directly. But her network, her methods, they are a mirror of the betrayal that destroyed my sister. His voice, though still carefully controlled, held a new, dangerous edge. She deals in stolen art, forgeries, uses her real estate empire to launder money, to provide fronts for her criminal enterprises. She destroys legacies to build her own. Alara gasped, her eyes widening. My father's research? You mean he was involved? Not willingly, of course, but he was an unwitting pawn caught in her web of influence, Dante confirmed, his gaze unwavering. She used his academic reputation to lend credibility to certain provenances that were, in fact, entirely fabricated. She left him financially vulnerable, a broken man, just as she sought to do to you. It is a pattern, Alara. And I despise patterns of betrayal. A cold fury, distinct from her usual despair, ignited within Alara, not just for herself, but for her father, for the countless others Isolde had undoubtedly crushed. You mean, you knew about her? About my father? All along. I have been tracking Isolde Thorn for a very long time, Dante admitted, his voice low, a confession not of guilt, but of grim purpose. Your situation simply provided an opportunity, a more direct route to her core operation. You, Alara Vance, are not just a talented restorer. You are the key to exposing her entire fraudulent enterprise. You see what others miss. The subtle inconsistencies, the fabricated histories, the layers of deceit. Your eye is invaluable. Alara stared at him, a whirlwind of emotion swirling within her. He hadn't just saved her, he had chosen her for a purpose far grander and more dangerous than she had imagined. He saw her intellect, her unique skill, not just her vulnerability. In his quiet, understated confession of personal loss, his long-standing vendetta added a new, compelling layer to the ruthless man. He wasn't just a powerful tyrant. He was a wounded animal, seeking retribution. So, this isn't just about saving me, Alara whispered, the full weight of his revelation settling over her. It's about revenge. For your sister. For my father. For all the artists she's stolen from. Dante's dark eyes met hers, ablaze with a cold, terrifying fire. It is about justice, Alara. My kind of justice. And now it is our justice. His voice was a solemn vow, a dangerous promise. The air between them thrummed with a newfound understanding, a shared purpose forged in the crucible of past wounds and future vengeance. Alara felt a terrifying exhilaration, a sense of belonging she hadn't anticipated in this gilded cage. She was no longer just a pawn. She was a weapon, and Dante Volkov, the Dark King, was wielding her. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the mansion, a deep, unsettling thrum that seemed to vibrate from beneath the very foundations. It was too low to be the storm, too rhythmic to be natural. Dante's head snapped up, his vulnerability instantly replaced by an alert, predatory focus. He stood, his imposing figure suddenly radiating renewed power, every muscle tensed. What was that? Alara asked, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. Dante walked to the nearest window, peering out into the torrential rain and impenetrable darkness beyond the mansion's carefully manicured lawns. His jaw was clenched, his expression grim. Something is wrong, he stated, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Something that shouldn't be here. Someone just tried to breach my perimeter. His eyes, usually unreadable, now held a chilling glint of pure, unadulterated fury. And they're coming for what's mine. The low, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the very stones of the mansion, a malevolent pulse against the backdrop of the lashing storm. Dante had been instantly transformed from a man touched by sorrow to a coiled spring of lethal efficiency. His earlier vulnerability vanished, replaced by an expression of cold, dangerous fury. Stay here, he commanded, his voice a low growl, his eyes locking with Alara's, a silent warning in their depths. Then, without another word, he moved with startling speed, disappearing from the library. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest. The quiet intimacy they had just shared, the fragile understanding, was obliterated by the sudden, brutal intrusion. She heard muffled shouts from outside, indistinguishable against the wail of the wind and the relentless drumming of rain. Then a sharp, metallic clang, followed by another, more distant, like the jarring echo of battle. She didn't know whether to obey Dante or to flee. Her instincts screamed at her to find cover, to escape. But where? This gilded cage, once a symbol of suffocating control, now felt like a fragile shell under siege. The very air tasted of ozone and impending violence. Driven by a desperate need to know, to understand, Alara crept out of the library, her bare feet silent on the polished marble floors. The grand hall was eerily quiet, the ornate chandeliers casting long, dancing shadows. She could hear frantic whispers from the lower levels, the sharp crackle of static from comm systems, a chilling symphony of chaos. Suddenly, a massive figure burst through a side door. Bodyguard, his face grim, a weapon clutched in his hand. "Ms. Vance, get back. The perimeter has been breached." They're inside. Before Alara could react, a blur of motion erupted from the shadows behind the bodyguard. A dark, hulking figure, moving with brutal speed, tackled him from behind. A sickening crack echoed through the hall, and the bodyguard slumped to the ground, unconscious. Alara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a scream. The figure turned, revealing not one, but two men, masked and clad in dark tactical gear. They moved with a chilling, practiced coordination. One grabbed her, his hand clamping over her mouth, muffling her desperate cries. The other, swift and silent, injected something into her neck. A searing pain, then a rapid, dizzying rush as her vision blurred, the opulent mansion tilting precting. The scent of chemicals and fear filled her nostrils. Darkness encroached, a suffocating blanket. The last thing she heard, faint and distorted, was a distant, enraged Dante's voice, a primal bellow of fury and warning. But it was too late. The darkness consumed her. When Alara woke, consciousness returned in painful, disorienting fragments. Her head throbbed, dull, aching pulse behind her eyes. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of stale concrete and something metallic, like old blood. She was no longer in the luxurious warmth of Dante's mansion. She was lying on a rough, unforgiving floor, her wrists and ankles bound tightly with coarse rope. Her eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. She was in a vast, desolate space, a derelict warehouse by the smell of it, somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Industrial debris lay scattered around, rusted machinery looming like skeletal monsters in the dim, flickering light from a single bare bulb hanging precariously overhead. A profound sense of terror, cold and absolute, washed over her. Then a voice smooth and venomous cut through the silence. Well, the little art restorer awakens." Alara's head snapped up. Isolde Thorne stood before her, not in her usual pristine business attire, but in dark, expensive, casual clothes, her face a mask of triumphant, psychotic glee. Her eyes, usually cold, now burned with a disturbing, manic light. Beside her stood several heavily armed men, their faces hidden by balaclavas. Isolde, Alara choked out, her throat raw, her voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" Isolde laughed, a brittle, harsh sound that grated on Alara's raw nerves. "What do I want? I want what's mine, Alara. My reputation back. My deal's intact. And the head of your mafia boss on a platter. And you, my dear, are the perfect bait." A chilling realization dawned on Alara. She wasn't just a captive. She was a tool, a lure in a far more dangerous game. Isolde wanted Dante, and she was willing to use Alara to destroy her to get him. "He won't come," Alara lied, a desperate attempt to protect him, even as a fresh wave of despair washed over her. "He doesn't care about me. I'm just a convenience. A means to an end." The words felt hollow, a bitter echo of the devil's bargain she had made. Had she truly been so foolish to believe a man like Dante Volkov could ever care? Isolde's smile widened, a cruel, predatory curve of her lips. "Oh, but he does, Alara. He cares desperately. More than you could ever know. He has been systematically dismantling my empire, piece by piece, ever since he took you. For you. He sent a very clear message. Do not touch what is mine. And you, my dear, are most definitely his. She knelt, her face inches from Alara's, her breath foul. So when he comes, and he will come, I assure you, you will tell him everything. Every secret he has, every weakness. Or I will ensure you experience a pain far worse than a broken bone. A pain that even your precious Mafia Boss cannot heal. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The cold, damp air seeped into her bones. She was alone, utterly vulnerable, facing a madwoman who had nothing left to lose. And Dante, he had been so fierce, so protective. But now she felt a terrible, crushing sense of abandonment. Had he truly been defeated? Or had he simply chosen not to pursue her, deeming her a disposable pawn? The thought was a torment, a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical restraint. Hours passed. Each tick of the distant, dripping water amplified her fear. Each shadow danced with unseen monsters. She strained her ears, listening for any sign, any distant siren, any whisper of rescue. Nothing. Only the mournful creak of the old warehouse, and the insidious voice of Isolde's threats replaying in her mind, profound sense of isolation wrapped around her, cold and absolute. She had put her trust in a dangerous man, a man of shadows and violence. And now, in her darkest hour, she felt utterly, irrevocably alone. Had he truly abandoned her? Was she simply not worth the risk, not worth the fight? The possibility, sharp and cruel, pierced her heart, a bitter echo of her past, of being dismissed, overlooked, expendable. The anger, hot and desperate, mingled with a crushing despair. She was nothing but bait, discarded, forgotten. A sudden sharp movement from Isolde's men shattered the oppressive silence. They were preparing something, moving with a renewed urgency. Isolde's eyes, alight with manic anticipation, fixed on the distant, boarded-up entrance. "He's here," she whispered, her voice a low, triumphant hiss. "The beast has come for his toy." Alara's heart leaped, then plummeted. He came, but for her, or for his own twisted sense of revenge. She didn't know. But the fear that he would find her broken, betrayed, and unable to protect him was a new agonizing torment. Her entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying knowledge that the confrontation was about to begin, and she was utterly, helplessly caught in the crossfire. The roar Alara had heard, distorted and distant, was Dante Volkov's. It had been a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, an animalistic bellow that had ripped through the very foundations of his mansion. He had known, the instant the rhythmic thrumming vibrated from below ground, that his perimeter had been breached, not by a clumsy thief, but by a cunning predator. And when his lead bodyguard, Marcus, had been found slumped in the grand hall, and Alara was gone, Dante's carefully constructed world had combusted into an inferno of cold, controlled fury. He didn't waste a second on panic. Panic was for lesser men. Dante moved with the devastating precision of a man who had faced death countless times and always emerged victorious. His eyes, usually pools of dark mystery, now blazed with a terrifying, singular purpose. "Find her," he barked into his comm system, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised agonizing retribution. "Every camera, every satellite, every informant. Tear this city apart if you have to. Find Isolde Thorn, and bring her to me alive, if only for a moment." His network, vast and shadowy, hummed to life. Cars screeched through the rain-slicked streets of New York. Data streamed into his command center, a hidden room within the mansion that pulsed with the glow of multiple screens, tracking systems, and maps. He watched, an imposing silhouette against the digital light, his jaw clenched, his muscles taut. Marcus, regaining consciousness, delivered the crucial detail, the dark metallic tang, like old blood, on the air where Alara had been snatched. A derelict industrial district, abandoned slaughterhouses. The scent of her fear of the place became a roadmap. Within minutes, a location flickered on the main screen, an abandoned meatpacking plant, deep in the forgotten industrial wasteland by the docks. Isolde's signature. Reckless, desperate, and fatally foolish. "Prepare the assault," Dante commanded, his voice utterly devoid of mercy. "No quarter. No negotiations. I want Alara Vance back unharmed. And Isolde Thorn will pay a price that will echo through the Underworld for generations." Dante led the charge himself. He didn't send his men. He was the vanguard, a storm of dark retribution. The armored black vehicles cut through the night, their tires spitting water, their powerful engines roaring. The air inside his car was thick with adrenaline, with the scent of leather and cold steel, and the barely contained violence of the men accompanying him. But Dante's fury transcended theirs. It was a primal, possessive fire, stoked by the memory of Alara's soft voice, her fierce passion, her fragile defiance. Isolde had touched his. She had taken what he claimed. And for that, there would be no forgiveness. Inside the derelict warehouse, Alara's hope had withered to a tiny, flickering ember. Isolde, a grotesque caricature of her former self, paced before her, her eyes darting towards the entrance with manic anticipation. "He's here," she hissed again, confirming Alara's worst fears and faint, desperate hope. The great Dante Volkov come for his little artifice. A distant siren, faint at first, then growing louder, cut through the night. Not a police siren. Something else. Something heavier, more urgent. The warehouse doors, old and rusty, began to rattle violently. Isolde's men, previously smug, tensed, weapons raised. Suddenly, a deafening crash ripped through the night as one of the massive metal doors exploded inward, torn from its hinges, sending a shower of rusted metal and splinters across the concrete floor. The cold, wet night air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of rain, gunpowder, and something far more terrifying, Dante Volkov's rage. He stood silhouetted against the chaos, a towering, formidable figure, his dark overcoat billowing around him like a predator's cape. His eyes, burning with an infernal light, swept across the warehouse, instantly locating Alara, bound and bruised on the floor. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that promised death. Isolde, his voice was a chilling pronouncement, devoid of human warmth. "You made a grave mistake." Isolde, despite her bravado, flinched. But then, a flicker of her old defiance returned. "Come for her, Volkov? Your little pet? She's quite comfortable here. And she has so many stories to tell." She gestured to her armed men. "Get him, and be gentle with the girl. She has information." Chaos erupted. Dante moved with an almost supernatural speed, a blur of controlled violence. He didn't need a weapon, his body was one. He was a force of nature, a brutal ballet of calculated strikes and bone-shattering force. Isolde's men, trained and armed, were no match for his singular, focused fury. A massive guard lunged at him, a glint of metal in his hand. Dante sidestepped with impossible grace, his fist a blur that connected with the man's jaw. A sickening crunch, and the man dropped like a stone. Another tried to flank him. Dante's elbow struck his temple, sending him sprawling. His movements were economic, precise, each strike delivered with the intent to incapacitate, to destroy. He was a whirlwind of dark vengeance, cutting a path directly to Alara. Alara watched, transfixed by the brutal spectacle, a mixture of terror and an almost intoxicating awe coursing through her. He was not just fighting for her. He was tearing through them, methodically, mercilessly, as if each enemy was merely an obstacle between him and his possession. He was a monster, yes, but her monster point, one of Isolde's men, seeing Dante's relentless advance, grabbed Alara, pressing a knife to her throat. "Stop, or she dies, Volkov," he screamed, his voice trembling. Dante froze. His head slowly turned, his eyes narrowing to lethal slits. The air grew impossibly cold. The fury emanating from him was a tangible force, making the very ground tremble. "Touch her," he growled, each word laced with a chilling promise of unimaginable agony. "And I will personally ensure your death is the slowest, most agonizing thing you have ever experienced. Your family will weep, your name will be erased, and your suffering will be a legend." The man, despite his weapon, visibly paled. He saw the truth in Dante's eyes, the absolute, unyielding commitment to his threat. His grip on Alara wavered. It was Isolde who intervened. Seeing her leverage slipping, she pulled out a small, ornate pistol from her coat, aiming it directly at Alara. "Don't listen to him, fool. He's bluffing. One more step, Volkov, and your pretty art restorer is nothing but a messy stain." Her eyes were wild, desperate, teetering on the edge of madness. Dante's gaze snapped to Isolde. A flicker of something predatory, something utterly merciless, crossed his features. He moved, not towards Isolde, but in a dazzlingly fast, deceptive feint towards the guard holding Alara. The guard, startled, flinched, loosening his grip for a split second. That was all Dante needed. In a single, impossibly swift motion, he disarmed the guard with a brutal twist, then kicked him away. Before Isolde could even process what had happened, before she could squeeze the trigger, Dante was on her. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause. His hand, quick as a viper, snatched the gun from her grasp, twisting her wrist with a sickening crack that echoed through the warehouse. Isolde shrieked, a sound of pure agony and disbelief. Dante didn't release her. Instead, he spun her around, pinning her against a rusted metal pillar, his arm like an iron band around her throat. Her feet dangled inches from the ground, her face contorted in pain, sputtering for air. He held her there, inches from choking, his face a mask of terrifying, cold retribution. His dark eyes, burning with a possessive fury, were fixed on Alara. His voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous growl meant only for Isolde, yet it resonated through the entire warehouse, chilling everyone to the bone. "You lay a hand on what is mine, Isolde," Dante snarled, his grip tightening, "and I dismantle you piece by piece. Not just your empire. You will beg for death, and I will deny it to you. You understand." Isolde clawed at his arm, her eyes wide with terror, her face rapidly turning purple. She made a gurgling sound, a desperate nod. Satisfied, Dante flung her away with a force that sent her sprawling onto the concrete floor, coughing and gasping, a broken, defeated wreck. His gaze immediately snapped back to Alara. He was by her side in an instant, his large, powerful hands carefully, gently working at the ropes binding her. "Alara," he murmured, his voice, though still rough with residual anger, was now laced with an undeniable raw relief. "Are you harmed?" Alara could only stare up at him, her body trembling, her mind reeling. He had come. He had fought. He had utterly annihilated everyone who stood in his way, all for her. The terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but was overshadowed by a profound, overwhelming wave of relief, of a strange, fierce belonging. He hadn't abandoned her. He had come, a dark, avenging angel, and reclaimed his possession. And in that moment, as his strong hands untied her, as his dark, possessive gaze swept over her, a dangerous, thrilling understanding settled in her soul. She was truly, irrevocably his. And a part of her, the wild, defiant part, thrilled at the terrifying, absolute protection of it. The darkness had tried to claim her, but Dante Volkov had ripped her back from its grasp, proving his devotion with a brutal, undeniable fury. He had fought for her. He had won her. And the world would now know it. The journey back to Dante's mansion was a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion for Alara. She was still trembling, the metallic tang of fear clinging to her tongue, but Dante was a solid, anchoring presence beside her. He had wrapped her in his overcoat, the expensive fabric smelling of his unique scent, leather, cold steel, and an underlying warmth that was strangely comforting. His hand, large and firm, never left her back, a constant, possessive reassurance. Once inside the mansion, the world shifted from chaotic violence to meticulous care. Anya, the unflappable housekeeper, met them at the door, her face betraying a rare flicker of concern. Alara was immediately whisked away to her luxurious suite, where a warm bath filled with soothing salts awaited and soft, clean clothes were laid out. A doctor, efficient and silent, examined her, administering a mild sedative to calm her frayed nerves and tend to the rope burns on her wrists. But it was Dante's presence, unwavering and absolute, that truly began the healing process. He didn't leave her side. He sat by her bed, an imposing sentinel, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He spoke in low, soothing tones, his voice a deep rumble that chased away the lingering echoes of Isolde's threats. He ensured she ate small, nourishing meals, held a glass of water to her lips when her hand still shook too much to hold it herself. He was the rock against which her shattered composure could slowly, painstakingly begin to mend. The trauma of the abduction, the terrifying confrontation, still played on a loop in her mind. She would wake in the dead of night, gasping, the smell of damp concrete and fear still in her nostrils. But each time, Dante was there, a shadow in the dim light, his presence a silent shield against the nightmares. He never touched her without her implicit permission, but his proximity, his unwavering gaze, was a powerful, unspoken promise of absolute protection. "She won't hurt you again, Alara," he murmured one night, his voice devoid of anger, only a chilling certainty. "I have ensured it." Alara looked up at him, her eyes still wide with residual fear. What did you do?" His lips, usually so stern, curved into a thin, predatory smile that held no mirth. "Justice, Alara. My kind of justice. And for Isolde Thorn, justice is a slow, agonizing unraveling. and unravel she did. Dante, with the terrifying precision of a master strategist, unleashed his full power upon Isolde's empire. He didn't merely defeat her, he annihilated her, surgically dismantling every facet of her criminal enterprise. Information, meticulously gathered over years, was meticulously leaked. Not to the mainstream press, which could be bought or intimidated, but to specific, targeted investigative journalists known for their tenacity and incorruptibility. Anonymous tips, supported by irrefutable evidence, forged provenances, illicit money laundering schemes, land deals built on intimidation began to surface. The initial reports were whispers, then gained traction, blossoming into full-blown exposés that shocked the city's elite. Isolde's pristine reputation crumbled, not through sensational accusations, but through cold, hard facts. Her legitimate businesses were exposed as fronts for massive art forgery and trafficking rings. Her philanthropic efforts revealed as cynical schemes to whitewash her ill-gotten gains. Her carefully cultivated image shattered into 1,000 pieces, leaving only the grotesque truth. Alara watched it all unfold from the safe distance of Dante's mansion, devouring the news articles, the online reports, the frantic chatter of the media. She saw the photographs of Isolde, once imperious and self-assured, now gaunt and hollow-eyed, being led away in handcuffs. The arrests of her key associates followed swiftly, a domino effect orchestrated by Dante's relentless pursuit of retribution. A strange mix of emotions churned within Alara. There was profound relief, a deep, satisfying vindication for herself, for her father, for all the victims of Isolde's greed. But there was also fear. The sheer, terrifying ruthlessness of Dante's vengeance was a stark reminder of the dark world she now inhabited. He was capable of such brutal, precise destruction. She had seen him transform from a silent protector to an avenging demon, and the sheer power of it was both awe-inspiring and deeply unsettling. One afternoon, a week after her abduction, Alara found Dante in his study, a room usually reserved for his dark business. He was on the phone, his voice a low, commanding rumble. As he hung up, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Your father," he stated, "is thriving in the new facility. His doctors report significant improvement. And Evum Restorations has been designated a historical landmark, securing its future indefinitely. All thanks to certain anonymous donations and influential lobbying." Alara's eyes welled up with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. Her father was safe. Her legacy, her dream, was secure. All because of him. "Thank you, Dante," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You saved everything." He simply nodded, his gaze intense, possessive. "I told you, Alara. What is mine, I protect. Your work, your family. All of it. Isolde Thorn tried to take what belonged to me. She learned the cost of such an insolence." His dark eyes softened infinitesimally, a subtle shift that made her heart skip a beat. "You witnessed a part of my world today. The consequences of defying me. Does it frighten you?" Alara looked into his eyes, seeing the raw power, the unapologetic violence that simmered beneath his composed exterior. Yes, it frightened her. Deeply. But it also fascinated her. And in that fear, a strange, fierce pride began to blossom. He was not a hero in shining armor. He was a dark king, ruling a dangerous realm. But he had wielded that darkness, that power for her. "It frightens me," she admitted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "But I understand. You do what you must to protect what you claim. And you claimed me. You claimed my future. And for that, I am grateful." A dangerous, thrilling realization pulsed through her veins. She accepted his darkness. She accepted him. She understood that his ruthlessness was a shield, forged in pain and betrayal, now extended to cover her. Dante stepped closer, his large frame eclipsing the light, casting her in his shadow. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the faint bruise near her temple where Isolde's man had grabbed her. His touch was surprisingly tender, yet filled with an undeniable possessiveness that made her breath catch. "Grateful is not enough, Alara," he murmured, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her very bones. "You are more than gratitude. You are mine. And now that the ashes of Isolde Thorn's world have settled, our own begins. A new chapter. Under my absolute protection. My unwavering claim." His dark eyes, burning with an intense, possessive desire, held hers. The shadows of his world were vast, But she was no longer afraid of being lost in them. She was finding her place, not just protected, but cherished, within his dark dominion. And as his thumb gently stroked her skin, a profound sense of belonging, dangerous and exhilarating, solidified within her heart. The world outside might be ashes, but inside this golden cage, a new fiery redemption was just beginning to ignite. Months bled into a year, and the world outside the Volkov estate, once a place of terrifying threats and crushing despair for Alara, now hummed with a different kind of energy. Even restorations, once a fading relic, had not only been saved but had blossomed. Its new status as a historical landmark, bolstered by Dante's anonymous donations and influential lobbying, attracted unprecedented attention. Clients, once wary, now flocked to Alara, her reputation not just restored, but elevated to legendary status. She was seen as a visionary, a meticulous artist who had overcome incredible odds. The media, controlled by subtle, unseen forces, painted a narrative of resilience and triumph, carefully omitting the dark hands that had orchestrated her success. Alara's studio within the mansion was a hive of activity, constantly buzzing with new projects. She restored not only Dante's sprawling collection, but also carefully selected pieces from reputable museums and private collectors, all filtered through Dante's discerning and watchful eye. Her father, his health significantly improved, was comfortably ensconced in the best care facility, his memory slowly but steadily mending, a direct testament to Dante's unwavering commitment. Their relationship, forged in desperation and violence, had deepened into something far more profound and complex. The initial unease of the golden cage had softened, replaced by a quiet understanding, a fierce mutual respect, and an undeniable, scorching passion that simmered beneath their interactions. Dante no longer just observed her from a distance. He engaged with her, discussing art, history, politics, his dark world. He valued her insights, her sharp intellect, her unwavering moral compass that, surprisingly, seemed to ground his own tumultuous existence. He was still Dante Volkov, the formidable Mafia Boss, a man of shadows and unyielding power. Alara had seen his ruthlessness, his capacity for brutal retribution, and she understood that his world was built on foundations of violence and absolute control. But she also saw the man beneath the mask, the quiet sorrow for his lost sister, the fierce loyalty to those he claimed, the unexpected tenderness he reserved only for her. He was a dangerous man, yes, but he was her dangerous man. And she, in turn, had become the only woman who truly saw him, truly understood the intricate tapestry of his dark soul. One crisp autumn evening, after a particularly challenging restoration of a Byzantine icon for Dante's private chapel, Alara found him waiting for her in the main drawing room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm shadows across his face, softening the sharp angles. He held a small, velvet-covered box in his hand. "Alara," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble, his dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You have not only restored my collection, but, in a way, you have restored something in me that I thought was irrevocably lost. You brought light back to shadows I had long accepted. You are not merely a restorer of art, you are a restorer of souls." He walked towards her, his presence utterly dominant, yet this time, imbued with a vulnerability she now recognized. He opened the velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson silk, lay not a diamond ring, but magnificent antique locket, intricately carved silver, with delicate gold filigree, clearly a piece of historical significance. It was utterly unique, breathtaking in its beauty, and carried the subtle marks of centuries of careful preservation. It was a masterpiece, perfectly suited for her. "This," Dante said, his voice dropping to a raw, intimate whisper, "is a symbol of my unwavering claim, my unwavering protection. It is a piece that has been in my family for generations, protected, cherished, passed down to those who are truly significant. Wear it, Alara, not as a chain, but as a testament to what you are to me, to what we are building. A partnership, a legacy, a future." His dark eyes, usually so guarded, held a fierce, possessive love that mirrored the storm within her own heart. This wasn't just a gift. It was a public declaration, a tangible promise of his absolute devotion and ownership. He was claiming her, not just as his protected, but as his partner, his equal, his queen in his shadowed empire. Alara's fingers trembled as she reached for the locket. It was heavy, cool, and exquisitely crafted. "Dante," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, tears welling in her eyes. It's beautiful. But She paused, looking at him, a sudden strength blossoming within her. I am your partner, Dante. Not just your protected. We face this world together. On my terms, with my skill, with my integrity. And you're our protection. A faint, dangerous smile touched his lips, a rare sight that always sent a thrill through her. Precisely, he rumbled, his hand reaching out to gently clasp the locket around her neck. Your terms, your skill, your integrity, all of which I am fiercely proud to protect and to claim. He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a possessive satisfaction that made her shiver with delight. You are my masterpiece, Alara Vance, and you are forever mine. The locket settled against her skin, heavy and warm, a constant reminder of the man who had pulled her from the abyss and made her his own. Their future stretched before them, not one of conventional peace, but of a dangerous, passionate partnership. The world, they knew, was still fraught with shadows and threats, new enemies always lurking. But now Alara stood tall, no longer on her knees, but shoulder to shoulder with a man who commanded darkness itself. She was his queen, his confidant, his intellectual equal, her unique brilliance shielded by his absolute power. Together, they would navigate the treacherous currents of his world, building their own dark peace, their own formidable empire. Their story had only just begun, a forever masterpiece in the making, bound by an unwavering devotion and a shared, dangerous destiny. Doesn't every soul, no matter how bruised or broken, deserve to be seen, truly seen, for its invaluable light? Alara's journey reminds us that your past wounds, the moments you felt most overlooked or diminished, do not define your worth. Sometimes it takes a fierce, unwavering hand, even one forged in darkness, to clear the shadows, allowing your own brilliance to finally shine. You are a masterpiece in progress, always worthy of protection, of devotion, of a love that sees your cracks, not flaws, but as sacred lines in your unique story. If Alara and Dante's tale sparked a flicker of hope or understanding in your heart today, please share that feeling. Like this video, subscribe for more stories of unbreakable bonds, and comment with "I'm seen" to affirm your own beautiful truth. Let's build a community where every heart finds its fiercely protected home.